And good afternoon and good morning, everyone tuning in from different time zones across the globe. I am Nadia Mosquera and welcome to our last panel of this workshop, Decolonial Feminisms in the United Kingdom, a conversation between Katucha, Bento and Emmanuelle Santos. This panel draws on a transatlantic epistemological dialogue on Afro-Latin American as well as Latin American indigenous decolonial feminist insights, taking space and expanding in the UK academia. This panel conversation will help us to both move forward and move away from thinking about activism and methodology as separate grounds. One of the core questions that has guided this workshop and continues to guide this panel conversation is, how does Latin American decolonial and feminist activism take place in the UK, and how can we develop it further? Before we start, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that I am meeting from the indigenous lands of Turtle Island, the ancestral name for what is now called North America. Moreover, I would like to acknowledge the Alabama, Ushata, Caddo, Carrizo, Comecrudo, Coahuiltecan, Comanche, Kicapú, Lipan Apache, Tonkawa, and Isleta del Sur Pueblo, and all the American Indian and indigenous peoples and communities who have been or have become part of these lands and territories in Texas. So now I will do a quick round of introductions, as we have two wonderful speakers inspiring this Afro-Latinx feminist decolonial conversation, Dr. Katucha Bento and Dr. Emmanuelle Santos. Katucha Bento is a lecturer in race and decolonial studies at the University of Edinburgh. Her research focuses on theory and practice centering collaborative projects on Black feminisms, decoloniality, queer studies, artistic expression, and anti-racist pedagogies that work through ethics of care, subversive language, and power to the people. Katucha is engaged in the Black movement, Quilombismo, and the Samba community in Brazil, and she's also the co-founder of the Free Afro-Brazilian University, aiming at promoting educational spaces using decolonial perspectives. Emmanuelle Santos is a senior lecturer at the Department of Modern Languages at the University of Birmingham. Emmanuelle's research draws on the global local dialectics in epistemology, literary and critical theory, focusing on the intersections between cultures of the Portuguese-Spanish-speaking world, post-colonial studies, and theories of world literature. Emmanuelle also addresses representations of race, gender, and sexuality, memory studies, word system theories, and decolonial critique in relation to inequality, oppression, and hegemony. Emmanuelle also coordinates the Portuguese study program and the Institute of Camões, Cátedra Gil Vicente at the University of Birmingham. Before I hand it over to our wonderful speakers, I would like to remind our panelists and audience to allow some time between ideas and allow some time to finish interventions as to facilitate the work of our interpreters who are simultaneously translating this conversation into Portuguese and Spanish. So now we will have 10 minutes presentation of our speakers, and then we will have time for a Q&A and a curated conversation on Afro-Latinx feminism between the audience and the speakers. Also, please feel free to raise your hand or write your questions in the chat as we go along. So thank you and welcome, Katucha and Emmanuelle.
Hello, I just wanted to ask, should I start or do you prefer Emmanuelle? What do you think?
If you want to start, Katucha, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. I am going to count down my time so I don't take over too much. Yeah. Hello, everyone. It is really nice to be here. I'm very excited for so many reasons because the panels have spoken to me in many ways, not only in terms of the intellectual and activist way, but also in terms of how we touch our hearts, the affect, the accountability that we need to hold on to, and also the spiritual levels of how our soul navigates through these topics of decoloniality, finding liberation, and being in the struggle. I'm going to share my screen with you. So let me try and share this. Can you all see the screen? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
So I will read, but I will try to do my best to be slowly. If there is any if I'm too fast, please just interrupt me. I don't mind, okay? So thank you for organizing this event with the voices, the presence, and the power of amazing people gathered in the exercise of exchanging and giving knowledge, time, and the emotional labor that must be acknowledged when we address decoloniality, especially because we know and feel how coloniality of power atraviesa, traverse, passes through our bodies and embodied ancestral traumas that we carry and hopefully let go in the path of liberation. In this conversation, I sketched a direction of decolonial interventions in British higher educations, preoccupied in addressing anti-Black racism in academia with intersections with nationality and gender. And just to situate, my work is not only grounded in British higher education, but this is what I want to address as we talk, because I think establishing the grounds within British higher educations to have different branches outside academia is fundamental. But while we do that, there is a lot of oppression going on, and that's what I want to address. I'm interested in practices that suspend the European hegemonic grain as cascading elements of resistance and refusal. What is called here as European hegemony is inspired by Kenneth Danziger Knight's assertion that Europe is not a physical place on the globe. Europe is an epoch phenomena that belongs to the domain of the spiritual shapes. The European hegemonic grain is a paradigm that represents the pillar of power relations, social organization, and systems of production and exclusion rooted in coloniality. Here, I refer to coloniality as a condition for existence, in a state of being, the ruler that scales the norm, humanity, and knowledge from the white, woman and men, able Western, European, cis heteronormative, and wealthy perspective. Coloniality sediments the possibility to such phenomena that is Europe to be present beyond the borders in the scope of mythocratical norm style, determining powers that govern fates and where there is no room for questioning that declares itself insubordinate to every practical, mythical, and religious motivation or consequence. So situating Black feminist thought, especially the Brazilian Black feminist thought, brings insightful concepts about the importance of standpoints, activism, and knowledge production emerging from Latin America. Our steps come from afar, for example, is a notion created by Jurema Werneck to explain how the Black feminist epistemology is weaved through ancestral knowledge, Afro-Brazilian cosmoperception, and activism. From Yoruba and Bento inspiration, Jurema Werneck is saying that we had those who came before us, set the path of resistance through the experience in the transatlantic passage, the racial terror, the dehumanizing conditions, the patriarchal violence, the Eurocentric Christian force against other forms of believing and existing in this world, by summoning those voices who are insubordinate to patriarchal colonial power. Being subordinate to patriarchal colonial power is one key aspect of Jurema Werneck that is also something that was addressed in the previous panel. Jurema Werneck says, it is important to keep the claims and matters that justify creating more social movements, organized communities who fight for social justice as heterogeneous as possible. We need to be diverse. And also to link with Audre Lorde, we need to celebrate this diversity. And I don't mean to romanticize that, but it is a political message that all these Black women are talking about. So the mobilization must be permanent, constant, ever changing against all the threats that can literally kill our physical, material, symbolic survival. It is within our differences that the anti-racist movement can shape an area of disruption of coloniality, contesting racist language inspired by Black Brazilian women such as Lélia Gonzalez with the concept Amefricalatina as a practice, as a methodology. And she suggests an alternative psychoanalytical grammar for language, using geography, consciousness, racialized and nationalized strategies to create resistance. The political, cultural category of Amefricalatina. Gonzalez sets this strategy to contest Western white women, men, European knowledge, to situate African and Afro-descendant construction of meanings. The concept of Amefricanidade, suggested by Gonzalez, weaves the Black and indigenous groups, the racialized category, together with the Caribbean, Latin American, and African locations, which is geography and nationality, in which is claiming the decolonial positionality of constant negation, negação, negation. This is a political word that she's playing with, and we can talk about that in the Q&A. So the constant negation of the place that racism reserves for people racialized as non-white. So how to create an Amefricalatina in British institutions? Well, I brought one example of challenging academic debates. The Challenging Academic Debates collective started in 2015 with the goal of organizing a sole activity in dialogue with Afro-Latin American and Afro-Caribbean Women's Day. So the idea was to push an anti-racist Black feminist agenda in gender studies at the University of Leeds, and it began with something very small, with very little support and attendance from the colleagues, research centers, and the department. The process of co-organizing and co-editing this conversation opened the doors to a wider political engagement that was happening beyond the situated critique of whiteness and coloniality of power present in the department. Challenging Academic Debates was not a sole event, but a small yet authentic refusal of the validation of knowledge, power, and existence of non-Western white epistemologies, agencies, and humanity. Challenging Academic Debates became 3 years seminars with publications, with conversations that went beyond the event as such. It was aligned with the student-led campaign across the UK, such as Why is My Curriculum White? Or Why isn't my professor Black? That posed the urgency to keep the transnational tone to this conversation as to denounce and dismantle Westernized institutions. Westernized means that Global South academic institutions can also reproduce the colonial white, woman, man, able, Western, European, cis, heteronormative, and wealthy perspective. So many voices from challenging academic debates had the space to contextualize how coloniality of power were reproduced in different institutions and the strategical possibilities to promote change at local and global levels in its 4 years of existence of seminars and publications. I'm sorry, I said 3, it was actually 4. At the British level, the Black presence in academia situates Black scholars in ostracism. And this is me just trying to make an intersectional analysis of how the impact on Black bodies, especially when we have a different nationality, are so violent. So how to speak from universities while recognizing them as this space of how to speak from universities while recognizing them as spaces of exclusion and discrimination, which hide the epistemic violence behind a rhetoric of meritocracy, collegiality, and the free exchange of ideas. This is a double kind of sword situation. I am finishing. The exercise of challenging academic debates has been happening in local and global levels, weaving transnational solidarity in British academia. Challenging academic debates, then, it's not just a series of events situated in a British university. Nor does it take a reductionist format to be a counter-narrative of coloniality, as this is an Amefricalatina movement that is happening in many different departments, in many different publications, often in isolation of people being ostracized or isolated in the work or departments, and entails critical rethinking and new historical coherence that cannot proceed from within hegemonic matrices, or using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, as Audre Lorde already taught us. It is its own narrative beyond remaining the single space of countering coloniality. There is a cost of doing that, a psychological, emotional, and in the labor we do, and it's more important to be strategical than giving up in name of guilt or saviorism that should be addressed elsewhere as we hold ourselves accountable of the ethics of caring that this practice requires. As we commit with decoloniality, the demand of repossession of our agency, our color, requires intention of decentralizing the roles of university as the meeting point of knowledge. So university cannot be the only place we meet. Deconstruct the formal publishing methods, reorganize the curriculum and pedagogical actions, give new meanings to Global South contributions, and open multiple possibilities for us, me, Black, Latinas, racially, gender, and nationally minoritized people, to be. The stolen right to complete existence reclaimed in our hands. So this is the praxis that I came to share with you, and maybe the provocation about how to do that in spaces that are inherently colonial. So I finished thanking you all, thanking the ancestors for opening the path as our steps come from afar, the experience that we shared here, the accountability that you all hold when doing the colonial work, the courage to dare to do that, and the dialogue that is also very important to build otherwise futures.
Thank you, Katucha. That was absolutely wonderful. Our next speaker is Emmanuelle.
Hello. So thank you very much, Nadia. I'd like to start by apologizing for the state of my voice. But I'd like to thank, of course, Valentina for the invitation to be here today. It's an absolute honor to be here, and I've been learning loads. It's incredible to learn from all of you, and it's very humbling, and it's a wonderful opportunity. Thank you so much. And thank you for the translators who are doing this fantastic job to widening participation. Thank you also to all the speakers today. Like, your contribution's been absolutely amazing. So I will be speaking in English, and that happens because most of the ways in which I've been thinking my intervention in this debate, they come in English because they come from me inhabiting the United Kingdom academia. And I have been finding it difficult to articulate them in Portuguese because I have to articulate them completely different. So I gave an opening address to a postgraduate program of the Universidade do Estado do Ceará, a program of applied linguistics with the professora Claudiana Nogueira. And in order for me to articulate those questions for that public, I had to change completely my way of doing it. And this is one of the things that I'd like to be talking to you about, and how this embodied experience and has been talked about by the colleagues talking about indigenous languages, and how the invisibility of the languages harbors the invisibility of people and their rights. So I will read my intervention in order to try to stay as much as possible to the 10 minutes. And I will try to do so in a okay pace. Please, Nadia, do interrupt me and tell me to change the pace should it not be good enough. Okay.
Yes, wonderful.
So my intervention is localized. Stating this for me means that I do not believe that I'm making points that are neither incontestable nor universalizable. I believe that totalities are strategic, argumentative devices that should be used in strategic interventions. I thus believe in the partially relatable, in the similar, in the comparable, and in the shared. The idea of the universal is so insidious and perverse that even threatens the transformative potential of the colonial thinking itself, as it often gets ideologically decontextualized when it travels to the depoliticized critiques of the global north. My location is that at the intersection of literary studies, postcolonial studies, comparative literary studies, Portuguese studies, modern languages, arts and humanities, and decolonial thinking. When I started my bachelor's in Letras Português, Inglês at the Universidade de São Paulo in Brazil, the long tradition of sociology of literature as a method gave me this idea that art was a way to understand society. And being Brazilian, to understand society meant almost automatically to understand inequality, coloniality, and structural contradictions. Literature was then, for me, a way to reflect on social inequality. Now, little did I know, it always thought like that, little did I know of the reality of literary studies in the UK, something that I came to know during my time working on my PhD in this country. Literature here is art, and its analysis goes back to traditions that can be from the philological realm and the aesthetic realm. Literary studies here is in the realm of the craft of the use of language, of the genius, and survives as long as it doesn't substantially disrupt the conservative political project of the day. The narratives, the characters, their bodies are encased within the realm of representation, suspended from the materiality of life, mirroring a worldview from the bourgeois authors that are often unmarked and universalized by a criticism that refuses to consider the impact of the means of production sustaining the literary industry to its craft and its value, and the value that they infuse when they are fixed by canonicity. All the other quote unquote stuff is relegated to what became a convention to call postcolonial literature. Authors and narrative that inhabit the contradiction underlying the structural inequality that sustains the types of global capitalism from which Britain has benefited since the beginning of modernity, those are then postcolonial. Literary works that I studied at home as form-defining narratives here are just labeled postcolonial. In the aftermath of my PhD, employability prospects were then another way in which my location as pesquisadora encarnada, or embodied researcher, as posed by Sueli Aldir Messender, was marked for me. Regardless of my work's clear dialogue with the postcolonial theory and my PhD to be in English and comparative literary studies, the market placed me in modern languages, which excludes English, and in the very confined field of the Portuguese studies, because this is the epistemic place my Black, foreign, and speaker of English as a foreign language self can inhabit. And it was in the process, it was in the transformative space of the classroom that the praxis freiriana, the praxis preconized by Paulo Freire, happened to me. He was in the process of teaching linguistic and cultural literacy in Portuguese and about the multinational, plurilingual, and pluriethnic abstraction of the Portuguese-speaking world, that I embodied, or that I incarnate, the subject-object dichotomy that marks modern languages as a discipline. I was the very raced, gendered, and classed subject the modern languages programs all over the UK like to exoticize. And by being one of the very few one of us who was not precarily employed, I was in a prime position to do something about it. These are the terms of my encounter with Latin American decolonial feminism. It came from a forced embodiment of my marked positionality, face the impossibility of bodies like mine to tap onto this universal vibe that is drenched in ideological, economical, and cultural whiteness. Very much in the model of praxis described by Paulo Freire and further elaborated by Bell Hooks, it was the very material, the very grounded experience of living that contradiction that took me to the intellectual process of theorizing and learning with the decolonial feminisms that is out there. So in the wake of these last 2 years, where I have been having the privilege to join a number of fora together with my colleague, Dr. Joseph Ford from the Institute for Modern Languages Research, since we organized one of the first conferences on decolonizing modern languages 2 years ago, I can say that Latin American decolonial feminism has been a very beneficial and pervasive influence for those willing to rethink modern languages. Despite the often shallow and superficial engagement with the premises of the colonial approach, capitalism co-opts, right? And the common disregard for the specific ways in which the colonial feminism furthers the potential of radical transformation of this approach, often ignored by views of feminism that are ingrained in the lived experience and advocacy for the liberal ethos of individuality, Latin American decolonial thinking, if not feminism per se, has definitely changed the way in which modern languages as a field in the UK sees itself and sees its future. It is by now established that despite our field's purported commitment with undoing othering and promoting critical literacy of transnational, if not global, proportions, coloniality is really enmeshed in our views about language, in our methods, our syllabi, and the very dimension in which we struggle to recruit students in higher education in order to survive as departments. And all that needs to change. People do accept it now, and that is to the credit of everyone bringing decolonial feminisms into the UK academia. I mean, at least when it comes to modern languages, it is filtering through, even though it's not really in the consciousness of people, but it's there as a horizon. People can't deny it. Now, apologies. In my view, one of the main advantages of, but also the main point of resistance to, the Latin American decolonial approach to working in the environment of British, but especially English academia, is the structural critique that rejects the alienation of the subjective and the material through the concept of praxis and its recentering and repeated exposition of patriarchal capitalism, as Lugonis has taught us, as the root cause of coloniality. This is, to me, the most revolutionary aspect of the decolonial approach to this culture that, in my field, is marked by the disembodiment and alienation. So every time I see a colleague speaking of coloniality without mentioning the importance of the means of production and materiality and extractivism of the world in what they're thinking about, I usually call them out for misusing the decolonial approach. For me, there is no talking decolonial without talking anti-capitalism. If these two are detached, then it's no longer decolonial. Two other questions posed to me by Valentina in the leading up to this event ask about limitations and opportunities of doing Latin American decolonial feminism in Britain instead of in the Americas, and how do we account for the lack of visibility of Latin American in Britain in comparison to other colonial centers where this theory has stronger roots, like the United States. I found these questions fascinating, and I will end up with them because I'm really interested to hear more what other people have to do and have to say about it. So I believe that one of the main reasons for the lack of visibility of Latin American in Britain is connected to the very reason why it's visible in the States, which is a way too complex to address in the time allocated to me now, but has to do with the very constitution of the US as a country, US imperialism in the Americas, and the migratory routes from Latin America to the United States in the face of many struggles faced by peoples in this continent. Over time, these dynamics tend to give way to Latin Americans to find their way into the imperial centers institutions to drive their agenda, just like Valentina's doing, just like I'm doing, just like all of us who have a permanent job in this country are doing. I mean, I don't even know if everyone that I mentioned has a permanent job, but I would like to hope so. So while I believe we need indeed to address the invisibilization of Latin American peoples and epistemologies in the United Kingdom, I think we have to do so by paying attention to the historical dynamics specific between what we call Latin American and what we call United Kingdom, or localizing the analysis in a decolonial fashion. In my field of modern languages, this is particularly visible as most people from Latin America do not have the research, teaching, admin permanent contracts that I have, and are often precariously hired as language tutors with very little job security and power to say or do or change anything in the institutions where they work.
Sorry, Emmanuelle, I don't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to double check that we are closing to 1 minute left. So
yes,
for you
wonderful.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Thank you. The most difficult question to me is then the one that Valentina has asked about, limitations and opportunities to doing Latin American decolonial feminism here rather than in Americas. I think that first and foremost, the decolonial feminist approach is one that considers the role of the capitalist longue durée expressed under the sign of coloniality from an embodied position that is attuned to its material conditions historically and presently. This is, to me, one of the aspects of decolonial feminism that is translatable everywhere where the cultural superstructure is attached to a capitalist base. From that perspective, to me, being in Britain can be both a disadvantage because it disembodies the knowledge-making processes about Latin America from Latin America. And it can also be an advantage because the differences between the feminist decolonial researchers' immediate surrounding and epistemological location of dialogue will always instill a comparative element to the analysis that can potentially keep the researcher on their toes when it comes to the systemic implications of their conclusions. But more importantly, for me at least, it is the disadvantage in doing this work here that we may sustain in this imagined idea of Latin America that to me can be liberatory over there in Latin America, but can be dangerous over here. And this is the last few sentences I have to say. I am known to annoy my colleagues in Spanish by asking them often what do they mean by Latin America, and I'm sorry if I annoy you with that. But mainly when it comes to our role as educators for British students here. Are we really embracing the limitations of Latinidad forged in the colonial crucible? What does it happen with the experience of peoples in the British and French Guyana, for example? Let's just erase Suriname and St. Martin or other parts of the Caribbean for speaking Germanic languages. Do we work with colleagues who focus on Caribbean studies here in the UK as part of our view of what Latin America is? Are they also Latino sometimes? I know it is almost a caricature that it takes the Brazilian in the group to ask this. But while I understand and agree with the Spivakian principle of strategic essentialism, speaking from a modern languages in the higher education and UK higher education perspective, the reification and the stereotypification of the very idea of Latin America suggests to me that it may need some decolonizing. Well done over here. But I'll end here and rather wait to hear what you have to say about this. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
That's wonderful. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Emmanuelle. Now I open the floor for the public. So does anyone have a question? They're open. They are welcome to open the mic and speak. Or well, we have a question now from Maru, and I'm going to read it for you. My question is how to get involved with the organization, if that is possible, or if we can propose un espacio sostenido de encuentro, like a space between researchers or people who are interested in Latin American decolonial feminisms in the UK, like what sort of networks are they for participation to get involved? Katucha and Emmanuelle.
I'm sorry, can you please, okay, it's the Maru's question.
Yes,
right?
correct. Yeah, I just read the Maru's question, yeah.
Yes, so hi, sorry if that was not clear. I didn't know you were going to read it out loud right away. Was just thinking that this is the first time I came across with such a great proposal. I think it's the first time that I have came across with a group of people that is interested in tackling this issue. At least from my experience in my university, I don't have anything of the sort. And I was just thinking whether this could be continued or if there are any reading groups or discussing groups that one could join after this like great meeting you have prepared for us today. Thank you.
I do feel this question might actually kind of be for me. No, I'm really sorry. Yes, I will text everyone after this finishes with the contact and make sure that we can create a kind of community and sustained communication. So that will happen. So yes, I will be in contact with you guys. But maybe Emmanuelle and Katucha want to talk about their own communities as well, because that's the other thing, kind of maybe going in with a question for Katucha, but talking about discussing these things outside academia, because, you know, one question is, can we decolonize academia at all? And the other one is, are we doing anything outside? Or, you know, are we saying we want to decolonize academia, but we don't take part in any social activism? So, you know, how does that look like here? As well as what Emmanuelle says about, you know, it might be misusing the word decolonize if you only are talking at university about this. So if you want to explain a bit more about that, or yeah.
I just wanted to say a few words. Emmanuelle, fantastic, right on point at the anti-capitalist core of the colonial critique. I think it needs to be more addressed alongside with the racial issues that we often, well, I mean, when we see how decolonizing, the idea of decolonizing has been co-opted by this new liberal narrative of, oh, we are cool, we decolonize every department or every curriculum without really addressing to the issues, we wouldn't be struggling with striking, for example, or even the language of the strike. But this might be a conversation for another thing. But I do understand that the neoliberal narrative in decolonizing has been really dangerous. Thank you so much for the question or the comment about how to create possible encounters and in solidarity of maybe decolonial Latin American feminism, or any way of creating spaces to think and to be. I just wanted to say two things related to this. One is how important it is for our work to have these spaces and think and exchange our knowledge. But two, how important it is for our mental health. Having a space to share this knowledge is crucial. So I would invoke Lelia Gonzalez as well. I'm sorry, I'm coughing. Emmanuelle feels me. We are both not 100%. I'm so sorry. So this invoking Amefricalatina is a political act, more than situating geography, which is sometimes, as Emmanuelle said, a place, a domain of sensitive conversations in which how we situate ourselves and how we define Latin America. Also because people in the Mediterranean are sometimes claiming the identity of being Latinos, right? Because they are Latinos. So how can we situate the global South understanding of where and how the solidarity is established? That's why Amefricalatina works, at least for me, in how I deploy this and how I situate that and how I situate that outside academia, getting funds in order to do projects in quilombos in Brazil. Getting the money from the global north, which we call dinheiro de cerveja. 20K, it's like the beer money, the weekend money, right? So we can send to communities in Brazil, and that's how I'm situating Amefricalatina, because it also suspends the attempt to co-opt the idea of Latinidad by European identities. Does that make sense? And this needs to be strategical, but also contextual. Like Emmanuelle said, it is dangerous to be here and try to claim the political space or even the identity as we have some privileged positions, but using that strategically with the privilege of our positions to navigate in these colonial settings, trying to open holes, also as Paulo Freire would say, as if it's a cheese, as if the university is a cheese and you are a small rat, go inside, making holes so you can open this space for other things to happen. And this is why I think we are doing. If, Maru, you are looking for a space to talk, if you're looking for a space to have a constant conversation, I am sure that Valentina will send some information, but as an associate director of RaySed, the floor, the platform is open. Let's do this and let's make this together. We already have something set up, and I'm happy to share our materials we have with you, we produce, but also to build more spaces for Latin American academics to be part of. And also not only Latin American, but Latin American researchers, researchers who are studying with Latin America. I'm sorry. Yeah, I will stop here.
Okay, wonderful. We have another question in the chat from Karen. She's asking, is there any improvement of this kind in teaching about African nations, African culture, or even the influence of these cultures on the Americas in British or European education? and wonders if these similar problems have improved or not in African studies. Do African scholars understand the assists with these issues in the academic community in the UK and Britain? I think it's mostly related to probably the geographical conjunction between the Afro-Latin American feminism vis-a-vis African continent and African cultures.
Would you like anybody to go back, or would you like to get more questions and then?
Well, it will be, yeah, we could probably get a couple more questions too, because we might be closing, running out of time. We have 2 hands up. We have Yvette Hernandez and Aiko. I would like to remind the audience to speak slowly, make really brief questions, as that will help us to kind of get the most out of the conversation between Emmanuelle and Katucha. Thank you. So Yvette, please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Honestly, it has been a fascinating day today, listening all this, different perspective about how we resist and exist, basically, in this country and around the world, basically. It's not only here in the UK. And I really like the point that Emmanuelle said about decolonizing the very idea of Latin America in the UK. I have to say both presentations were amazing. Really enjoyed both presentations. And one of the things that I want to share with you, that was also my question in the morning, after the interesting session led by Nadia, Andrea, and I think someone else that I forgot, is the concept of diaspora in this country. Mm-hmm. And for me, the key question is how we can really contest the concept of diaspora, particularly when it has been co-opted by the left in this country, because this is also another important point. I mean, I'm sure that for some of our Chilean comrades that are in the chat, the idea of coming from Chile sometimes and saying you're from Chile, the first thing is coming, you came as exile. No, I'm not coming as exile. I mean, that is the kind of hegemony that also exists in the way in which the left has co-opted the concept of diaspora from Latin America. And probably when we are talking about this idea of decolonizing, we also need to put the question in the political field and see how we can contest these aspects as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Yvette. Now we have Aiko, please unmute yourself. You're muted. Muted.
So the first thing, I feel like I'm looking a bit all over the place, but first of all, I'd just like to thank you very much, Emmanuelle and Katucha, for these presentations. It's just really amazing to, after a very long day that was very productive in my head, it keep alive and keep paying attention to it was really engrossing. I have a comment which relates to what Madhu just said, but also a question. And one of the things that I recently just experienced is that sometimes we don't know that there are spaces because there aren't, and creating spaces within your university, within your colleagues, just a small informal conversation where you can discuss maybe one article at a time, sometimes is a good way to start. And what I wanted to ask to you in relation to that is that one of the things that we think a lot when we think about decolonizing is also challenging canon. And I think Emmanuelle mentioned that as well. And how can we create and discuss and decolonize further without further creating canons within the decolonial discussion? How do we escape the fact that we always go through to the same people, and because we have to discuss their ideas and not go to other ways of making knowledge, of understanding knowledge, of challenging what knowledge is there and what are the same voices that are always there. I personally get sometimes very sad that I always have to go to Mignolo, always, and we cannot escape that. And I'm a bit tired of this voice already. I know there are others, but how, especially if you're looking for new things, where do we start and how do we avoid these canons reproducing themselves in decoloniality as well? Thank you very much once again. Muito obrigada.
Thank you. That was a wonderful question as well. So yes, before we kind of start answering the question, I also wanted to ask a question regarding to the ways in which embodiment fits within both of your practices, like, you know, being Afro Latin America, decolonial feminists, and embodying these feminisms in the UK. Because, I mean, in your case, Katucha, you do practice the quilombismo as well. And then in the case of you, Emmanuelle, you are coordinating and you are actually in very key positions in the UK to amplify this movement of decolonization. So I wanted to kind of just kind of tell us a little bit more about how that experience has been playing out in the last few years, especially now that the visibility of decolonization is kind of exploding in the UK. So yeah, it was just more like what has been your experience so far?
Katucha, would you like to go?
I think I spoke too much in the previous. If you could start, I'm more than happy.
That's okay then. So I made notes of the many things. There was this question about whether there was any improvements in terms of teaching history and cultures and languages about African nations. This connects with different points that have been spoken today. Some of these points spoken today had to do with we have to be able to go beyond European languages. True, we do. You also have to remember that European languages are spoken outside Europe and outside the Americas, and they are spoken in Africa. So if you are one of these people like me, who is colonized to the core, and all languages you know at this point in history are European languages, there are knowledges from other geographies that we can still search for. And this has indeed, in my opinion, changed quite a lot. Today in the United Kingdom, there is no program in Portuguese studies. And again, Katucha spoke more about a landscape of changing in terms of the decolonial efforts in the UK higher education in general. I'm going back much more to my turf in terms of modern languages. And I would just like you to keep that context in consideration. So when it comes, and then I'm reflecting programs, events that I've had, other syllabi, people talking about the stuff they're doing in classroom. Today, there's no single program of Portuguese studies in the United Kingdom that does not have a considerable space for Portuguese-speaking Africa. And there are 5 Portuguese-speaking African countries, all of which are multilingual, all of which will bring the Portuguese language in a radical different way than what it is used in Brazil and in Portugal. And this very centering of Brazil and Portugal in terms of this idea of lusophonia, lusophone, which is a word you'll never see me publishing. I never write it. But it's there, and that problematization is there, and the very idea of what diaspora Portuguese-speaking world means is different. We also talk a lot about countries of Asia. Portuguese is has been a revolutionary language for East Timor. It is a language of opportunity for China and for Macau, but it's not. You know, it occupies dynamic different places. So in my program specifically, those questions, they have a massive input, because I'm Brazilian on one hand, and on the other hand, my PhD talks back and throws stones at post-colonial theory from the study of literatures of Portuguese-speaking Africa. Basically say, yay, post-colonial theory, you know nothing because you haven't read those books. Right? Because they can tell me that I know nothing because I haven't read them books. So I can tell them they know nothing because their theories don't cover what my books talk all about. Right? And there is that positionality in this discussion. So I think things have changed and things have improved. Things have changed and have improved because people like me, like Valentina, like Katucha, we do have I think you guys have a permanent job. Have you got a permanent job, Katucha? You have a permanent job. That changes everything. That changes everything because it gives us a seat on the table. And that you don't. You see, you don't. You see, Valentina, all this you're doing. She does not have a permanent job. That is criminal. That is criminal. Now, in terms of ways to connect to other people, Maru, I would say, look about the different intersections of the different communities that you're part of, you consider yourself part of. And you probably are going to find all the people who are thinking about this as well. And you may find some incipient activities, like we do have the Decolonizing Languages Network, for example, for modern languages or for languages in general, that people who are not looking in languages perhaps know of or about, and they have those initiatives everywhere. So look for stuff, you will find stuff other than that which Valentina is going to put in place, because she promised. Poor Valentina. Now, the concept of diaspora and what has been done with this country. I was discussing diaspora, Yvette, with a colleague the other day, and the word diaspora can mean so many things, right? Because I lived in Brazil until I was 26 years old. I'm not going to tell you how old I am now, but I am clearly diaspora in that sense. What do I make of my daughter, who was born here during the pandemic and speaks Portuguese as her first language? What is the diasporic relationship that she's going to have with Brazil in that sense? Do you see what I mean? Sometimes I really think that those words, sometimes I think if a concept's not helping us, I think we cannot use it and look for something that will advance our causes. And one of the things that I find very annoying is that it seems like there's only some people who have this power to forge concepts, and it's not. We can all forge the language, the conceptual language, to deal with what we want to talk about. And if diaspora doesn't work for specifically the kind of relationship you're looking for, Yvette, coin another term and tell the world that that is the term that we should be going for in order to understand that specific relationship. Because in order to name is to point. And sometimes we cannot name relationships and situations that are there because we do not know how to name them. Others who do not embody those places and those experiences will not be able to name them for us. We have to name them, and we have to learn from each other in that sense. And I encourage everybody to do this. Talk back to theory as they talk to us. Creating space. Okay, yes, creating a counter canon. Now, oh God, get me started. I do literary studies. Canon is a disgrace. Is the horror. I hate canon so much. Because if you look at David Damrosch and the whole world literature shenanigans, he says that there is a canon, there is a counter canon, and world literature is a hyper canon. I'm like, throw away the canon. Oh, we're not gonna die. We're not gonna die, right? Throw away the canon. Usually, the fight that I have with people here, Eiko, is that if they only, including my PhD students, if the only people they are quoting is Mignolo, I send the work back to them and I say, read more widely. Read at least the stuff he read. Like, honestly, not like I give it back. We don't have to be talking about Mignolo all the time. We have to be, you just should learn to Google keywords on these Google Scholars and on our libraries and read each other's and read PhD theses and quote for them and take them. Do not take it, because PhD theses and master theses, they are available usually in repositories from universities. In Brazil, that's wonderful. Every single thesis that is there made by a public university is publicly available online. Let's do this. Let's absolutely do this. And people say, oh, you didn't talk about me. I say, yeah, because everyone does. Well, bad for you. In terms of embodiment, Nadia, and I'm really finishing. It's really interesting because it's like, I feel related a bit into that piece of literature that Ellen has read for us. I think I was embodied by other people. You see what I mean? Because in Brazil, the mulata has such a place that I always inhabited that place. That place felt natural to me, right? Now, when I came to this country, and also I did not come to this country straight away. I went first to the Netherlands for 4 years. So basically, people looked at me in the Netherlands and thought I was from Indonesia. People look at me here, if I straighten my hair mainly, they think I'm from India. Basically, I am people's, the imperial center embodiment of their colonial shenanigans, right? And they reflect all of this stuff on me because they can't pin down necessarily where my accent is from, unless the person is Brazilian or a person is from different parts of Latin America that you know exactly how the Brazilian accent works. So this experience has been wonderful. It's painful. Katucha put on incredible, because there was something that Eiko was talking about. Well, we can create spaces and we can start these readings, but Eiko, who pays for your time? You still have to deliver whatever you have to deliver. You still have to mark whatever you have to mark. there is only so much unpaid work, and there's so many hours in the day that you can do this work. And what about the stuff that Katucha was talking about? What about all our emotional, what about Valentina doing all this job that's not necessarily going to get her a promotion, because if she doesn't have a permanent job, is she going to get a promotion? Is it going to take her further? Shouldn't she not be doing this and publishing on whatever venue that this country thinks that is the most important thing that is going to get her a permanent position? Do you see what I mean? When Valentina does that, she's literally saying, okay, I'm going to be doing this because I believe this, and etc., etc. But this structure is not necessarily going to take me forward. So embodiment, Nadia, has been delightful, but because I've learned to take strength from that pain, and also because I have a permanent job, and that changes everything. And firing is so much more difficult, and I basically use that as my shield. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm gonna give Katucha 3 minutes for responding questions, and then we will close the event.
Okay, I just wanted to say, I don't know if I'm going to be able to address, but I just think about the numbers of how Black academics are present in the UK, in British academia, and then take those numbers and think about the highest amount of migrants coming into the UK who are now Latin Americans. So if we're talking about representation or underrepresentation, we have to cross with the gender, the race, because Latin America is not like only one, usually how they address, right? How they racialize Latin Americans is just like everyone is Latin America. So if you cross the intersections of what it means to be present in this space, I just wanted to address, yes, it takes time and the emotional labor to build these spaces, and it's not going to be recognized when I ask for promotion, and it's not going to be recognized, but it is my mental state that needs to be situated. I need to address to that. Otherwise, the level of isolation it's so damaging and so toxic that we need to address to that, like in a very serious way, if we want to do decolonial work. Otherwise, it is also slippery in how we end up reproducing those same colonial patterns that we want to go against, because we are isolated, and the only way to get in or get heard is when you kind of reproduce those things. So that's one thing that I wanted to address, just to speak with Emmanuelle, because I hope we have further conversations. It has been amazing. It has been beautiful. Thank you. I learned so much from what you presented. Now, Aiko, yes, that's the second chapter of my thesis, which I'm trying to publish. I'm like, oh no, Ramon Grossfogel, great work. We have so many white Latin American and Caribbean scholars who have been saying so many interesting stuff, and it's important to quote Quijano, but as I speak, I also need to understand that my references are political, and trying to engage with Shirley Ann Tate or Sylvia Wynter is not just because I am trying to deploy a different way of doing decolonial work, but also understand how I embody that decolonial work. And I don't embody Quijano. I do understand that he has very important contributions, but he's the way he navigates in academia doesn't really speak to the way I want to navigate in academia. So addressing to that, and this is how I draw my critique, and this is why I go to Lelia Gonzalez, but also Tatiana Nascimento, who disrupts the language, and she creates new meanings as she goes to talk about our liberation and our praxis of anti-racism or decoloniality cannot go only through the pain, cannot only go only through the understanding that non-white people were being killed or being damaged, but also how we know how to produce poetry, how we know how to creating the Quilombos possibilities of living otherwise. They are already doing this. I mean, they and also me, because I'm a daughter of the Voduns, of the Orisha. I am a woman of Axé. If you don't know what it means, this means candomblé. And I am the daughter of a Quilombo. So we have been practicing this. Although it is suspended in time, it is not as constant and permanent as we would like to be, but it is there. And it is a source of inspiration, at least for me. So I hope to have these spaces that I'm not paid, that I'm overloaded with workload and so on. But I hope to create spaces where we can flourish, and we can also address to how important it is to our mental state and our experience to be ourselves other than just the other, right? Like Emmanuelle is, like wherever she goes, she's the other. No matter what other it would be addressed to her, but it is the other. So why not to be and to have the space to think critically in a flow that it is not only about the production and productive styles. This is me. I didn't address to everything or everyone, and I apologize for that, but I also understand that everyone has a place to be, people to see, and I really appreciate you to be with us until this time.
So thank you so much. That was wonderful, Katucha. Thank you so much, Emmanuelle. This has been an amazing discussion. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately, we are reaching the end of this panel session. But I also would like to apologize, all of us. You made really interesting comments in the chat, and also you raised your hand, and we unfortunately we can't address all these comments. But yes, absolutely wonderful. And thank you, Valentina, for organizing this panel session. And yes, let's just keep this conversation going. We need to think about collaborations in the future and keep expanding these spaces, because these stories are so important, are so much needed, and we don't really get much space to talk about it. So yeah, thank you, everyone.